All right. Well, thank you for joining us here today, everybody. Uh, Today, we are here to talk about the Consolidator Plus and its new feature designed specifically around pump control and HOA or handoff auto switches. You should be seeing both me talking right now, and you should be seeing a screen share that I have up. If you're not seeing that, then let me know and take a look at your settings. That all having been said, a few things I always want to address before we begin these presentations. You have probably noticed by now that you are in listen only mode. That means that I can talk to you, but you are not going to be doing much talking back. There's simply too many people on the line for that to be viable for this kind of a presentation. However, if you have questions during the presentation, uh, please feel free to send them in to me. Comments are welcome as well. You can type those into your webinar chat, or you can ask them in the Q&A section, and I'll try to pause periodically and address those. I'll address the first question that I get the most during these presentations, which is, can I get a copy of the slides, or is this webinar going to be recorded and made available to me later? And the answer to both is yes. We'll send out an email probably mid next week that will have a copy of the presentation in terms is a PDF that will have all these slides on it. But then you will also get a recording of the presentation, so you can share that with anybody else you want to have this information. Lastly, favor to me, when you are done this webinar, you may see a survey pop up. It is super short. It just asks you how we did and if you have any feedback. If you could take 5 to 30 seconds to fill that out, if it does pop up for you, I would sure appreciate it. It's the only way we get feedback to make these presentations better. So if you have anything you'd like to add, then I would encourage you to do it. With that, I'm going to try to respect your time today and keep this webinar to our half-an-hour slot. If we have to stick around longer for Q&A, we certainly can, but we're going to jump in and get started here. I'm going to turn my video off so you can focus on the screen. And let's talk today about the Consolidator Plus and its new advanced pump control and HOA switch features. For those of you familiar with the Consolidator Plus, you'll see there's a new way we're handling pump control to make it a little easier to set up and allow some more complicated pumping systems to be built. For those of you who are new to the Consolidator Plus, well, great. You're going to learn a lot today. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Joe Ryan. I am the VP of Sales and Marketing for Precision Digital. I've been in the industry for 20 years, doing everything from product development as an electrical engineer to marketing and selling these sorts of products. So I've seen a lot of these. I've worked with all kinds of different products. I'll tell you the Consolidator Plus is one of the most convenient products I've ever seen out there for somebody who does not want to have to learn to program a PLC. It is a pretty amazing device for when you need something more than what you can get out of a panel meter, but you don't want to have to set up a PLC or an HMI. That is really where that consolidator sweet spot is. If you're doing multiple level transmitters, if you're doing multiple flow devices, or even gas detection, and you want to bring it all into a central location, but you are not an expert at PLCs and HMIs, this is the product for you. So today we're going to do a quick overview the PD9000 Consolidator Plus. So see what this is. It is a pretty unique product, so it's very helpful to just do a quick review of it. Then we're going to look at the new pump control and HOA features and what those mean. We'll briefly discuss how you program it, just to give you a sense of how that build works. And then we're going to see how you use the HOA switches, whether that's a remote switch or a digital switch of the consolidator, to control those pumps. And again, HOA stands for hand auto off, which is basically automatic, a manual, or a forced off mode. So let's start with a quick overview of what the Consolidator Plus actually is. The Consolidator Plus is a NEMA 4X panel mount multi-channel controller. So there's a lot there, but all of these words mean something. So NEMA 4X means that it's a waterproof and dustproof, great for outdoor applications controller. It's a panel mount, meaning that you use a 10 by 10 cutout, and that's what this slots into. So you'll need either an enclosure or an existing panel to mount this somewhere. And then the back of it is not sealed in any way. That's where your heat venting is done. That's where you make all your connections. But the front has that NEMA 4X seal. And it is a multi-channel controller, meaning that you can take all sorts of different 4 to 20 milliamp inputs, pulse meter or flow meter or pulse inputs, digital inputs or even Modbus inputs into this, and display and control based on all of those things across multiple channels, multiple PID loops, multiple batches, you name it. You can have up to 28 analog inputs coming into a Consolidator Plus, just to give you some scale of what we're talking about here when I say that it's a multi-channel controller. Now, there's a lot to go over here, but this is not just a webinar about the Consolidator Plus. So I'm going to jump down here a little bit and talk about the new features specifically. What's new on the Consolidator Plus is on-off multi-set point and lead lag control. In other words, and then along, by the way, with lead lag control, we have pump alternation control. So we have new ways of setting up channels to do this kind of control, which make things a lot easier to program, and then simultaneously let you do some more complex control if you'd like to. We've got switch functions internally to the Consolidator Plus now, which are great for controlling pumps like HOA switches, those handoff auto switches. And that could be one of two types of switch. That could be connections to, let's say, the digital inputs, which are going to let you use your classic chunky mechanical switch on the panel that you lock into either a hand and off and auto position, and then use those to control your individual pumps. Or you could actually use HOA on the front screen here, see what that looks like, to control your handoff or auto switches using your onboard 5 push buttons underneath those programmable soft keys. And we're only going to get a little preview of it here today. There'll be more webinars coming that'll talk about this topic. But one new feature we've also added with this is ticket printing capabilities. And along with that is batch control. So if you do much batch control, the Consolidator Plus now has those capabilities to control multiple batches if you want, and each batch can have multiple segments or multiple stages if you want. And you can connect it up to a ticket printer where you program up what you want the ticket to say. And let's say at the completion of the batch, it just auto prints a ticket. There's other ways to configure it as well, but that would be your sort of basic scenario. Looking at the back of the Consolidator Plus really helps you understand it, because now you're going to be able to really see what we mean when we call this thing a multi-channel controller. You can see here that you've got 7 card slots on the left. And each one of those slots, each one of these slot positions here, can be 4 pulse inputs, 4 analog inputs, 5 analog outputs, or 5 relays. So this particular build has 4 pulse inputs, 2 cards for analog inputs, 2 cards for analog outputs, and 2 cards for relays. It's worth noting that every one of those analog inputs and analog outputs also comes with its own 24-volt isolated power supply. So though the spec here doesn't show it, this also comes with 8 24-volt power supplies for inputs and 10 24-volt power supplies for its outputs. If you wanted a printer, by the way, it takes up one of these card slots to get the printer connection. On the right side of the Consolidator, you've got 4 digital input standard, your programming USB connection standard, 5 digital output standard, and either AC or DC power. You also get RS-485 Modbus slave capability standard. You can get even Ethernet option installed for Modbus TCP/IP slave capability. And this picture doesn't have it, but you can get a USB stick connection here for data logging onto a USB stick as well. There are also codes you can enter in and buy separately if you want to unlock Modbus master capabilities through that RS-485 or Modbus packet sniffer capabilities through the RS-485. And then you also have one that unlocks that fast controller feature and the USB data logging. This gives you an idea of why I say it's a great alternative to PLCs and HMIs. You get a large 5.7-inch color informative display. And with that, you have the ability for the Consolidator Plus to automatically choose how things are going to show up. So you don't have to program this like you might with, say, an HMI, where you have to tell it, I want this, starting at this pixel, load this graphic, put this text, keep it at that font size, through some kind of specialty programming interface. With here, you just tell it what you want to display, and it does it for you. So if you want 4 items on your main screen here, great. And you can see each one's going to have a tag that you can give the screen, tag you can give the channel. It's going to display its units and its numbers. You can do it as feet and inches or no decimal number. You can put decimal points in there. You're just selecting what you want in the programming software and it renders it for you. So you go turn off your checkbox to show bar graphs and it turns this display into that display. And you don't have to actually program anything about how it's going to show up other than I just don't want to see bar graphs anymore. Also, because it's full color, you get some great ability to pair up your bar graphs with your numbers. So those are easy to connect. You get the ability to turn on red alarms, yellow alarms, really any color you want. You could have flash. You could have the text be white and have it on a dark background. There's all kinds of ways you can set this up to get it to look like what you want it to be. And you get 20 different screens to put your information on. So you can get some pretty detailed screens to follow up these general screens. So for example, you could be looking at here, this screen 1 over here, and see South End storage. But when you want to see more information on tank 1, you just click that right arrow, and it's going to bring you over to this tank 1 detail screen, where it's going to give you how many gallons you've got there, what your milliamp reading is from the transmitter, and it can give you all sorts of information about how long your alarms have been on, what alarms are connected to it, etc. I said it was full color. You get 65 colors to customize all the colors of everything, your alarms, your bar graphs, your text, your backgrounds, you name it. And again, these soft keys on the bottom are programmable for every screen. So you can have them be your HOA switches like we saw earlier. They can be screen navigation buttons. They could be simulate buttons to turn on a simulation mode so you can change your inputs and see how the system would react. They can acknowledge your relays, silence your horns, lots of different ways that people have used this. The best way to program this, because it is so configurable, and because you have to, quite frankly, put so many tags in and so many channel names, etc., just connect it up to your computer via USB and use our free ConsoliDator Plus programming software. You can certainly make changes to it through the front panel if you want, but I recommend you use the software, and then once you've got it deployed, if you need to tweak something, that's what you use the push buttons for. If you don't already have a panel you want to drop this into, we've got a series of NEMA 4 and NEMA 4X plastic and painted steel enclosures. These come with that cutout already in the box. So all you have to do is drop in the ConsoliDator Plus and install a few screws. Now that we've reviewed a little bit of the background on the ConsoliDator Plus, let's talk about specifically what these new features are that we've implemented. So first, let's talk about lead lag pump control, and if you want it, alternation. So this is an example where we're going to be looking at one wet well. That's how we're going to step through this. We'll see how we would program it up. In this case, we've got one pump control panel set up looking at one wet well. Now, maybe I'm using this to monitor multiple wells, multiple sumps. I could have those all on one screen, but just for the purposes of here showing what's happening, we're going to see one wet well on the screen, and we're going to see the status of 3 pumps that we've got operating that wet well. So pump 1, 2, and 3. Already looking at this, you're going to be able to tell that I've got pump 1 on, I've got pump 2 off, and I've got pump 3 off. And I can see the status of my wet well in terms of a bar graph, so I sort of have a good understanding now, just graphically, of how full it really is. And we've chosen to display that in feet and inches. So this is what your basic control panel might look like for a wet well, where I've got 3 pumps running. And right now I've got 1 pump turned on that is draining that pump. How would I set that channel up? Well, in this case, what I do is first how would I set up the control sequence? First, I'd set up the input for the actual well level. That's going to be the input to my on-off or my multi-set control channels. So to do that, I just give it a name. So here we named it East Wet Well. Its function is a 2-point linear scale because it's just a basic level indicator and sort of a standard cylindrical well. My input is this analog input coming from my level sensor 1. So that's just what my 4 to 20 input is. It tells me which channel on the input cards I have coming in. And we've chosen our units to be feet and inches because that's just easier for people to understand when they look at it. We really don't have a lot of scaling going on here, so we're just 4 milliamps is equal to 0 feet, 20 milliamps is equal to 20 feet. And my bar graph is set up so that I have 20 feet as my 100% on the bar graph. We also named that color just color 1 to keep it simple, and we made it the sort of aqua color. So if I go back, well, I guess the colors don't quite match up there. I think this would be that color, and it looks like it's a little different. But you get the idea. That's how you set the color for channel 1. So that's what it looks like to set up my level channel. Now what I'm going to do is there's multiple ways I could choose to set up the control of those 3 pumps. But one of the new features we added is this multi-set control. So let's take a look at what that does. So instead of using multiple channels for on-off control, which is what I would have had to do in the past, I can just set up this one channel and give it multiple different set points. And it will let you see all of these set and reset points all on one screen so you can easily tweak them and understand how they're going to interact. So my channel is going to just be called, we just called it multi-set control. Its function is on-off multi-set. And the input to this channel is our level that we just defined. So a moment ago, we defined our 0 to 20 foot channel. Now we're going to send that 0 to 20 foot channel into here. So all of these set points are going to be based on that 0 to 20 foot level channel we just built. Same thing with those reset points. And now I just enter in all of the set points I want. So I want one set point at 16 feet, one at 17 and 18. And then I want the reset points to be 6, 5, and 4, respectively. What that means is that every time I reach a new one of these set points, it's going to send an on signal to the next step in the system, which is just the control system. So when we reach 16, I'm sending, this channel is going to produce a relay on signal that'll pass along to the next step in the chain. When I reach 17, it sends a second signal. When I reach 18, it sends a third signal. And when we reach 6, it'll turn off that signal. We go down to 5, it'll turn off that second signal. Then when we get down to 4, it'll turn off that first signal. So it's just a way to condense down the number of channels you have to create and let you see everything in one place. It's a little less confusing for people when they want to set up multiple channels or want to set up multiple set points. Then we're going to feed those set points into a lead lag control channel. We just called this one lead lag control. Its function is that it's a lead lag channel. So when I select from the drop down of functions, I'm just going to select lead lag control. And what you feed into this lead lag control is all the different inputs that are going to be sending those on signals. Now, in this case, you can see we've got 3 different on-off channels. I can replace all of those with my one multi-set channel that we just configured. But if you were configuring this in the past on older versions of the product, then you would have had to put in 3 on-off channels into your lead lag control. Now, what is the difference between lead lag pump control or lead lag pump control with alternation, or what we here generally call pump alternation control? Well, in lead lag control, you're always turning on main pump first. So going back to my concept for this simple wet well, when I reach 16 feet, I'm always going to turn on pump 1. Then when I hit 17 feet, I'm always going to turn on pump 2. When I hit 18 feet, I'm always going to turn on pump 3. So pump 3 should never turn on until the other 2 pumps have triggered. If I set up instead a pump alternation channel, which is just, instead of lead lag control, it's just a channel called lead lag control with pump alternation. What happens then is when it sends these on signals, it's going to alternate which one of the pumps turns on, which is great for maintenance purposes, for extending the life of your pumps. In general, I think the best benefit personally is that you're not going to have pump 3 just rust away, have nobody realize it works. All the time I've seen situations where people don't cycle their pumps as part of regular maintenance. And so, every 2 years, maybe they need pump 3 to turn on. And when they finally call it, oh, it failed and nobody's checked on it in 2 years. And now we have a problem. Well, by cycling the pumps, you'll always know if you're getting near a pump failure. Pump starts to have problems. So with pump alternation, pump 1 would trigger the first time you hit 16 feet, followed by pump 2, followed by pump 3. But once everything's drained down and I hit that 16 feet mark again, I'm going to start with pump 1 and then turn on pump 3 and then turn on I'm going to start with pump 2, then 3, then 1. And then the third time I turn on a pump at 16 feet, I'm going to start with pump 3 and then do pump 1 and pump 2. So it's alternating the process of turning on these pumps starting with 1, then going to 2, then going to 3. Each time it has to start a new sequence, it's starting with the next pump in the sequence. Hopefully that I've explained that pretty well. And we're going to take a look at what that looks like in a second. So now I've got my channel. It's going to it's going to accept these on conditions from either a multi-set or an on-off channel. And all I need to do is point my relays to this lead lag control channel. And then it will control the sequencing of those relays. Here's what an application might look like that's using these 3 pumps on a ConsoliDator Plus. So I've got my level transmitter. That's where everything starts. It's sending in my 4 to 20 milliamp signal to the consolidator. It tells me what this height is. We are using that to control these 3 pumps. And we've already talked about that. But the Consolidator Plus is a multi-channel controller. And so you might as well use that to your advantage and really make some bulletproof level systems here. So what we've also done is we're taking in a redundant float sensor input that's coming in as a 4 to 20 milliamp. And there's channels you can set up that are called things like select A or B that say, hey, you know what? If I set up an alarm for this level transfer that says, if you go over 21 milliamps or under, let's say 3.9 milliamps, I want you to set off this transmitter fail alarm. And in that case, I want you to start looking at this submersible level transmitter instead. So you can add in redundant level transmitters to the system so that it will switch over in what is likely a failure mode to that secondary set of controls. And I've got digital input standard. I may as well use those too. So here we've got a high and a low float, and I could use those just for alarms. I could use those to force on some of these pumps that otherwise might not have turned on. There's a couple different ways I can use those floats as either sort of emergency indication or actual emergency pump control if for some reason I feel like those aren't triggering, all based on what the customer's looking for. So if you're going to use the Consolidator Plus, because it's got the great display, because it's got these kind of control features, take full advantage of it. Build these redundant transmitters and sensors into the system because it does a lot more than what your basic panel meter can do, and it is really helpful stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about HOA switches, your handoff auto switches. So what we've done now is we've taken that HOA switch from before. I'm sorry, we've taken that wet well screen from before, and we have added handoff auto switches just to control pump 1 here. And again, you could build these into more complicated screens where you have a screen for each one of your 3 pumps, and you're still doing 3 pump control. But just for simplification of explaining the feature, you'll note we no longer have 3 pumps on here. We just have our east wet well, and everything is being controlled with just 1 pump. So we're looking at just 1 pump here, just to simplify the explanation. And so here I've got the status of pump 1. Pump 1 is currently off. It's displaying some pump information for me. It's giving me the runtime and the cycle count. Nice maintenance information to have. Then what we set it up to show here is what is the automatic control system telling me should happen with this pump. So based on just my set point and reset points of my alarms, what should be happening? And we're giving you the state of the HOA switch that we've set up internally. So this is using HOA switches on the consolidator, not using a remote toggle switch. But I still have my bar graph showing me my east well level, and I still have that displaying in feet and inches, so still useful there. And in reality, if I were setting this up for a real world application, just to kind of give you the full picture here, going back a few slides, what I would do is I would have this panel here showing me the status of all 3 pumps. And then when I push my right arrow, I would have that bring me to this screen, because this is specifically our HOA for pump 1. And then when I push this right arrow, it's going to bring me to the HOA for pump 2. And it's going to have a right arrow. And that's going to bring me to the HOA for pump 3. So I can implement all these HOAs and all 3 of my pumps, but I don't have to view those all the time. I can just see my basic wet well information right on the phone. So what's going on here is, if we look at sort of the state of this, my alarms are telling me pump 1 should be on, but pump 1 is off. Pump 1 is off because our HOA switch is in the forced off position, which means that somebody came up to here and they pushed this button, which forces that pump 1 into off. Because it's now in that forced off state, I've got a yellow alert. So if I wander off this screen to other places, I can hit that alert button and it's going to tell me, hey, just so you know, you've got this switch in the off position. So don't wander off because you've messed with the way this should be getting controlled. If I hit the auto button here, it's going to turn that pump on again because normally my sequencing here would be telling me, hey, we're too high. We need to turn on that alarm. We're over 16 feet. Whereas if I hit the hand position, it's going to force it on. That's what hand is. Hand is really auto on. Or sorry, hand is really manual force on. And so I hit the on button, sort of regardless of what the sequencing is called for, it's going to just force this thing to be on because my HOA switch is going to be in the on state. So if you want HOA switches and you've got the large mechanical switches, that's great. If you want HOA switches and you want to program them to just work with the soft keys, you can do that too. How do you set up one of these HOA switches internally in the ConsoliDator programming? Again, I told you the ConsoliDator Plus, there's no code, there's no ladder logic, there's nothing like that. Well, you build yourself a switch object. You go to your setup, you select that you want to switch. So here's our switch 1. We've named it HOA pump 1. The type of this switch is a 3-way switch because we've got 3 states here, right? We've got our hand, our off, and our auto. And each one of those switches has a configurable tag you put on it, a name you give that switch position. So we just name them hand, off, and auto. And over on the left, this is what that position actually does. So hand, which means force on, we just make that a 1. If I send a 1 signal to a relay, it's going to turn it on. Just boom, you're on all the time. It doesn't matter what else is going on. Off is the exact opposite. We make it a 0 because we just want to send an off signal to a relay to say you're off all the time, no matter what. And in the case of the switch being in the auto position, it's going to look to our, in this case, our pump alternation channel and just do whatever it is that the pump alternation channel is telling it to do. If it's telling you that I got to have this relay on, it's going to turn it on. If my pump alternation sequences and alarms are saying, hey, this relay doesn't need to be on, great, the relay is going to be off. But it just sort of behaved normally for whatever that pump alternation sequence is telling it to do. Oh, forgive me here for a second. There you go. Now, I have a short video I'd like to play for you. It's going to show you what all this looks like in an actual system when it's running. So let's take a look at this. I think it'll explain things pretty well for you. And then I'll be back with you here in just a couple of minutes. Do me a favor, when this starts to play, type in your chat box and just let me know if the audio and the visual are coming through okay on the video. Much appreciated.
And with Precision Digital. Let's take a look at the ConsoliDator Plus multi-channel controller and see how it can be used to control multiple wet wells with multiple pumps being controlled on each one of the wells. This ConsoliDator Plus is set up to monitor 4 wet wells. While you can have 8 pieces of information on any ConsoliDator screen, this one is showing just 4. The 4 wet well levels in feet and inches, as well as bar graphs representing how full the well is. You'll notice there are horizontal lines on each bar graph showing the point at which one pump will turn on for level control and the point at which both pumps will turn on. Our customizable soft keys are currently displaying a right arrow to move to the next screen, our scan or stop scanning button, which will start or stop automatic screen scanning, a button to show the status of all relays, and an all alarm acknowledge button. To show you the control setup for wet well 1, we're going to press the right arrow and go to a wet well 1 detail screen. Here I once again see the wet well level in feet and inches as well as the bar graph, but we've also added relay 1 and relay 2, the 2 pumps that are being used to control wet well 1. You'll see their status, which is currently off, and the fact that you can see the runtime and the cycle counts for those pumps, which is great maintenance information to have. On this detail screen, I have soft keys that allow me to force on the relays, or simulated input if I want to run this system through a complete test. Let's see how all this will function in practice. As the level begins to rise in my well, I'm going to cross that first alarm threshold at 8 feet. When I do, one of my pumps is going to turn on. I've got my yellow alarm active, and relay 1 is now on, which will drain my level until I get below the reset point. When this happens again, you're going to notice that pump 2 will turn on. Because this is pump alternation control, we're alternating which pump turns on. And once again, that should drain my level, and now all my pumps are off. However, if one pump is unable to keep up with the rise in level, so in this case, I'll once again turn on pump 1 as they alternate back and forth, but assume that because there's too much water coming in to the wet well, or perhaps pump 1 has failed, and the level keeps going up, at 10 feet, I'm reaching my red alarm level, and both of my pumps are now on. I could also, of course, have additional alarms signaling operators to intervene. And when I reach my reset point, both my pumps will turn off. For maintenance purposes, we've added in a soft key, which will force on relay 1. And you'll see that relay 1 is on, so long as I hold the button. Or which will force on relay 2. And if I want to test the complete system function, I have my simulate button, which allows me to manually change my input to simulate the fact that my water levels are rising. And when I'm done my test, I just hit the real button and return to my actual signal levels. The ConsoliDator Plus is a great option.
Well, thank you very much, folks. The main idea there was to sort of show you what some basic pump control or pump alternation, in that case, sequencing looks like. We didn't get too much into the handoff auto. You can tell it's a little hard to see the screen, but it does give you a nice understanding of what that would look like. Now, I'll take questions in a minute or two here and wrap up, but I did want to tease that ticket printing capability a little bit. You will be seeing in the next couple of weeks some more webinars from us on the ConsoliDator Plus, where we'll be talking about the batch control features, and we'll be talking about the ticket printing capability. And here you see the ticket printer connected up to the ConsoliDator Plus, where you can program in custom tickets to print out with your batch control sequences. So perhaps, for example, at the end of a batch, you may want to have it print a ticket. Because the ConsoliDator Plus is a multi-channel controller, you can do multiple batches, you can do chains of batches, you can do recipes, you can have the batch controller automatically start new batches when it's done, or print a ticket when it's done. All sorts of different ways you can configure this, which I'm pretty impressed by. So I'm looking forward to talking about it. For those of you in the audience who are distributors, we do have a ConsoliDator Plus demo available. It comes ready to show with programming already in there to illustrate some of these features. 9502 of our PD 9502 signal generators to generate a 4 to 20, so you can live demonstrate the alarms turning on and off, for example, and what that does to your screens, and the light and horn that comes attached. It even comes with mounting feet, so it stands up in front of your customers. If you are a user of these kinds of products in the audience, you see both, and you'd like to get a demo of the ConsoliDator Plus in person and have somebody come in with one of these, let us know that, because I'd be happy to get somebody out there, either from Precision Digital or one of our distributors, to show you what the ConsoliDator Plus is like, that you push some buttons and see this in person. So with that, I'll take a couple of questions before we wrap up here. I see we've got a few. Keith had asked, do we need to update our ConsoliDator software on our new laptops to get these new functions? And the answer is yes, you'll need to do that. There is a new version of the ConsoliDator software that was released. It does not auto-update. And so you'll need to download and install the new version of ConsoliDator Plus software to be able to see those features and program them in. And they will only be active in new consolidators. So if you download that new software, you expect to see some of these new switch functions and the new way you program the relays. That's only going to work on a new consolidator. So either do that for a recently bought consolidator, or if you have a demo already, get in touch with me and we'll work out getting it back here for an update. Peter had asked, can you control VFDs with a 4 to 20 million signal and PID controller? You certainly can. If you're trying to control, for example, a flow speed and you want to use PID control for that, Consolidator Plus can handle that without a problem. It's got PID control loops that you can build into it and have it do that VFD control from a 4 to 20 milliamp output. Thomas is asking about the 24-volt power supplies. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, Thomas's question here, do I have a 24-volt power supply to run my level transmitters on the input side? Well, every single one of the analog inputs and analog outputs has its own isolated 24-volt power supply. So if you get 4 analog inputs and 5 analog outputs, you've got 9 isolated 24-volt power supplies to run all of those inputs and outputs. So yes, you certainly get a 24-volt supply. You actually get one for every analog input and output. And Keith, you have some more questions about updating things. So get in touch with me. Let's talk those individual cases out. And Ahmad, you're asking about that printer. Do we supply a printer integrated on the panel? We do not. We only offer a wall mount or benchtop mounted printer. That doesn't mean you can't work with a panel mount printer. It just means that we didn't find one we were particularly happy with to offer as one of our own products. And we weren't going to design our own mechanical printer. And so you can hook it up to other printers than the ones we offer, but we only offer a panel, a wall mount or a desktop printer. So there's certainly printers you can get out there that will be panel mount, but we do not sell a panel mount version of the printer. Tracy's asking about dimensions of the screen and of the screen and back outer border / seal. I will have to check in to those exactly. The screen itself, I believe, is 5.7 inches, but what the overall dimensions are of the consolidator on the front of the panel versus the cutout, I have to look at the drawing. You could certainly get all that information off our website, either the 2D drawings that are available there or onto the data sheet, but I'll be happy to follow up with you and get you that information. And Peter wants to know, do you only offer Modbus TCP/IP, or can you just have regular Ethernet TCP/IP? We only have communication via Modbus TCP/IP. So this doesn't host a web page or put data up in the cloud, at least not yet. However, right now, what you can do with the Ethernet function is it will be Ethernet addressable so that some other piece of software somewhere in the world, in the cloud or on a device, can reach out to it via its Ethernet address and pull that data out using Modbus protocols. With that, folks, we've got a little bit over, so we're going to wrap up there. Again, if you see our survey, when we bring this to a close, please do me a favor, fill it out. And if I didn't get to any questions you may have had, we'll either be in touch if you asked them, or if you didn't ask them yet, feel free to contact me and we'll talk them over. I thank you very much. I hope it was a nice use of some time here on your Friday. And I hope to see you all at our next webinar when we discuss the Consolidator Plus batching features and printers. Thank you very much.